Welcome, everyone. I'm the president of the class of 1952, and it is our pleasure to put this preceptorial, Truth Matters, on in the 1952 room, which is a very important part of Princeton because it's at the heart of where the students go. There is a spirit in this room, which is indicated by some of the pictures on the wall and also by the clapper out of Nassau Hall. But this spirit is something that is not just owned by the class of 1952. It's really owned by all Princetonians. So what we want to do is use this room in a very positive way for many generations, and the generations will go beyond the class of 1952, even beyond the class of 1979. It is important to have uh, age diversity when we look at what truth is all about. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Phil. And Phil, you go ahead with something that academically is very important.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Phil Hueber, class of 1979, also honorary class of 1952. I was given that honor because I lead the class of 1952 Precept each year. I think this is our sixth year. And this year we've chosen the book Truth Matters by professors Robert George and Cornel West. And it's an incredible book that is based on a course that Robert and Cornell taught, a freshman seminar on Truth Matters. And the two of them had just become friends when they volunteered to lead the freshman seminar course. And this book is basically as a result of that book. I can also add that I cannot imagine how challenging that class must have been for a group of 18-year-olds. And I think that you'll hear that in a conversation that we're going to have during this precept. And in the precept, our other speakers are my friend Prentice Hall, president of the great class of 1979, and David Miller, who is the director of Princeton's Faith and Work Initiative. And he is well known as an ethicist, and he's also, interestingly, just published a book that we're going to just share a little bit about before we get the precept started. So David, talk a bit about your new book.
Well, thank you. And thank you to the class of 52 and 79. I'm also class of 79, but from different university. So thank you for letting me be.
Good thing you wore orange.
You're kind to mention the book. So I have a new book coming out with Princeton University Press. It's built around, actually, just like Truth Matters is built on the course they co-taught. My new book is called The 5 Questions for Ethical Decisions, every title has to have a colon, right? And the subtitle is How to Succeed Without Selling Your Soul. And that's the nickname that my undergraduate students here gave an ethics course and professional responsibility course that I teach, How to Succeed Without Selling Your Soul. So I'll pass around a little flyer if you want. It's coming out of Princeton University Press, and essentially it's trying to take the course and make it come alive as a book so that others can have a window into it. So thank you.
Yeah, so that's just fantastic. So to get started, I was struck in Truth Matters. It's obviously has a thread in our current national discourse and climate, but not only was I struck by two opposites politically having a genuinely close friendship based on seeking truth. And the truth that they seek, actually, the same truth sometimes leads to different policy prescriptives. But I was also struck by the power and influence that their teaching must have had on these 18-year-old freshmen, really being challenged in class. And one striking example that's mentioned in the book was Robert George noticed a student openly weeping in his class. And after class, he confronted her and he said, I saw your emotion. Can you explain what's going on? And she said, you had us read St. Augustine, and it just deeply moved me, to the point where this student was actually seeking Robert George's assistance in becoming a Catholic. And I was just wondering, David and Prentice, that was just a striking part of that book. What your thoughts were on that?
Yeah, as you're looking at me, I'll jump in. So first, the power, and I think of myself as a professor, that it's humbling at times to think of the influence, for better or worse, that we can have as a teacher on the students. And I think that's extraordinary that Robbie and Cornel reached that young woman. I've had moments in my course, because we do look at the role of religion in ethics. Obviously, there are many ways to think about ethics through secular and sacred resources. And I have had students come up to me and ask about my own faith. And there, maybe I take a little bit different approach from Robbie, and I respect obviously what he did. But I usually will say to the students, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it, but I think we should wait till the end of the semester, because I don't want any conflict of interest. I don't want them to think I'm trying to sway them towards my view. And I think Robbie and Cornell also are not trying to persuade as much as understand. So I think that's wonderful. I've had analogous situations, but I'd say handle them slightly differently. And they do come, and then you do have those conversations, and it's very heartwarming.
It was funny. I attended the seminar that Cornell and Robbie did at reunions last year, and one of the questions that they received mostly from parents of students are, well, what do they really get out of your class? And I won't quote exactly because it's a little shocking, but basically he said, I'm teaching them how to fail. And the point of that is that we all will experience failure, and better to learn how to deal with it as an 18-year-old than later. So Prentice, your thoughts?
Well, honestly, I thought this poor girl, she must have been unmoored that this one class would convert to a new religion. I personally, I couldn't relate to that. I didn't come anywhere close to being that disconnected from a moral and ethical foundation. But I think the point of the book was about how talking about truth and the fundamental values, the fundamental ultimate truth that define what it is to be a human. Those are very powerful ideas, and they obviously had a lot of power in the case of this particular student.
So another question I pose to you is whether you think it either ironic or hopeful that two close friends with opposite political views could come together and seek truth together.
I think it's at first maybe ironic, but I don't think it is when I pause further about it. I think it's certainly hopeful. And to me, what they had is they had a unifying principle. Something drew them together, a common interest, no matter whether they're black or white, atheist or religious, whatever. They were drawn by pursuit of truth, and then how to speak truth. I mean, think back, for those of us in the room who are old enough, I guess, class of 79, we might remember Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, Democrat from Massachusetts, and Bob Dole, Senator and leader of the Senate from Kansas, arch progressive, liberal, arch conservative. And they knew how to get things done. So that on the floor, they would be debating tooth and nail. And afterwards, they go out and have a beer and they'd figure out a solution, which we don't see that much of today, sadly. So I think if maybe the key is in our own personal lives is to think of what's the unifying principle with the person that we're trying to engage with and learn. And maybe it's sports or love of music. And you can find then synergies around that can then build a trust, that can build a candor, and throughout a deep respect sort of underpins their friendship. And I think that's what's the that maybe the secret sauce is respect and a common unifying principle.
Yeah, Prentice?
So, I was hoping you would ask this question. So,
Funny you have.
right at the beginning of the book, I was extremely confused, because Cornel West begins by saying that the difference between me and Robbie is, he goes from Plato to Aristotle, Cicero to Aquinas. And I go from Plato to Lucian to Chekhov to Kierkegaard. I had no idea what they were talking. I was an engineer, right? But the difference between them, I don't think is really political so much as it is how they construct their view of the world. Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Aquinas is classical Western philosophical construction, synthesis. Plato to Lucian to Chekhov to Kierkegaard is very subjective. Why Cornel keeps talking about jazz. He questions a lot of things. He's very skeptical about things. He doesn't necessarily accept everything that Plato says. But Lucian, very important, Lucian made fun of all those guys. He was cracking jokes at all these great philosophers and these great thinkers. But what struck me in the book is what they have in common is they're both afraid. They're both very concerned that our empire is in decline. And I know you're going to talk about that later, but there's a cycle that nations go through, that great empires go through. And Plato talked about it in Plato's Republic. And there's a point in the cycle where democracy leads to dictatorship. And they're concerned that we are taking steps down that path, and that what students are not learning today is actually contributing to the more rapid decline of the things that hold society together. And there's a point in the book where they both agree, that what holds it all together is the virtue of the people. That's what the Constitution is based on at the end of the day. And I think that's where everything comes together for them. Whether they're different politically, they seem to agree 100% that something needs to be done. And as teachers, what they do is they teach. That's their solution.
Doesn't exactly sound like an engineer to me. Well done, Prentice.
Yeah.
I was also struck with the thought, by the way, that I almost wondered, I mean, David brought up Tip O'Neill and Bob Dole, different era, obviously, but does the two-party system almost by definition fall into the good guy, bad guy category, where there is not truth seeking? Is that just inherent to a two-party system?
I think that it's an issue of scale. That if it's a one-on-one relationship where you both represent different, what's called ideological or political positions or worldviews, I think it's easier, as Robbie and Cornel have done, to come together to find common ground and then to debate and learn and laugh and intensely have their conversations and passionately. But when you then have it's the problem of scale, that suddenly you have thousands of people, millions of people in your party, and someone's a leader at the top, and that's where it gets harder, I think. And so it's not so much two parties. To me, although it manifests itself that way, but I think it's the problem of scale. And I remember back, I was in the corporate world for many years before going into academia, and I had a situation once. I was over in London. We were involved in this big lawsuit with one of our clients, and it was going on and on with the lawyers, and they're going back and forth, and it was going nowhere except just costing a lot of money. And what finally is my counterpart and the other side, one of I can't remember who called who first, said, "Let's talk. No lawyers. Let's go to a cup of coffee and talk." So it got back from massive scale to just two people at the top who cared. We each realized, let's find a fair way to solve this. We're each a little bit right, we're each a little bit wrong. And that's what the two of them did. So maybe for us with our two-party system, our leaders hopefully someday will learn to do that, to pick up the phone and talk.
Yeah. France?
Well, I think the founding fathers designed this experiment so that it would be a two-party system. It's a winner take all. It's not proportional representation. If you win by one vote, you get the whole shebang. And that's based on an even more fundamental understanding, I think, that I got from the book, is that you can't have justice without order. You can't even begin to think about having a just society and just laws without order. And they knew that. They were very educated people. They knew all the classics forward and backwards. And I think that's was part of the design. Now, my further thought was that, yes, I agree, you can't have justice without order, but you can also have great injustice with order as well. And I guess the dark side of the two-party system, right, is when they become corrupt, the parties can become corrupt, and either party can take steps to wire in injustice so that they protect their own and they protect the elite. And that's one of the concerns, again, that to me came out in the book. They're concerned that they're seeing that more and more now, where accountability is not expected the way it was, the way it should be in a more classically ordered society.
Can I just add to that, Prince? I think that's really interesting. There's even a phrase, the party line, and when the parties have such homogeneity that there's no room within a party, because the corollary is a big tent. So we have some organizing principles. We come together as our philosophy for our party, but within that, there's room for debate and healthy debate sometimes. But at the moment, I don't think we see that. The dissenting voices, be that from either party, they're told to no, be quiet. There's a reason sometimes the leaders called the whip to whip them into shed. So I think when that control side, it could be for good or for ill. I think it's a great point you make.
And the word dogma comes up several times in the book about the danger of dogma.
Yeah.
And I think that's a concern that they both share.
Yeah.
So a little bit of housekeeping, by the way. This precept will have a hard stop at 5:30. We will try to leave a few minutes for questions, and hopefully there will be some questions. Back to the sort of like ironic versus hopeful side. Well, my favorite issue of the Alumni Weekly is always this one, Lives Lost. And the memorial of Gerald Jones, class of 76, it plays right into this book. So Jones had encountered just horrific racism from the age of 6 on. And there was a bill in front of the Virginia legislature to put Confederate flags on license plates. And he was a representative in the Virginia legislature. And he stood up and he spoke about his experience. And he said, I was on a bus riding by a burning cross. The fear in that bus was so great you could smell it. All we could do was hope and pray that we would not be molested because of that symbol of hate. And now some want to put that symbol of pain on the cars of Virginia. So the room was silent. And they voted to drop the flag from the license plate. So we can hear, we can listen. There has to be hope, right? But switching topics a little bit, there's a chapter in the book called Abortion, Race, and Identity. And I have to just tell you how influenced I was by this book, because on the issue of abortion, I am still firmly on the pro-choice side of things. But I will admit in my past that I sort of fell into the good guy, bad guy side. And I didn't really understand the other side until I read this book. And I no longer consider the pro-life side to be the bad guy. I actually have a new and profound respect for the pro-life viewpoint, although it hasn't changed my view. And it was actually nice to have learning experience from a book at age 68.
Before I come in that, can I just go back to Mr. Jones for a minute? If I did the math correctly, rereading the article, he was 65 years old when he made that speech in their chamber that changed the vote. And it made me think of something I talk about with my students, that how one person can make a difference. Sometimes the odds seem overwhelming. Why do I even try? And there's a sort of the theologian in me. There's in the Hebrew scriptures, there's this book called Esther, and this great line that goes, "Perhaps for such a moment as this you were born." So he had this whole life, an extraordinary life, obviously, and with many profound moments. But perhaps for that moment he was born. Because also the article goes on to say, if you haven't read it, that he had never told anyone that story. That's the first time he publicly told people that story. And what a moment to pick.
Yeah, he nailed it.
So, yeah. But I think Robbie and Cornel would give you an A for the fact that you listened, and although your mind didn't change, you had a newfound respect for the other.
I read books like this, and it makes me really sort of, why wasn't I a more serious student? I mean, I was okay, but like seriously.
You were not alone in that.
I know. Prentice, your thought?
I never thought pro-choice were the bad guys, so but I think in the larger sense, this bad guy, good guy is, that's one of the themes that they talk about, is and how if you don't have an adequate education, meaning if you haven't read some of these great books, if you haven't had your thoughts challenged, that it's very easy to think in terms of bad guy and good guy. But what they keep coming back to is that humanity is actually, well, what Cornel West says, that humanity is wretched. And George says something like that. He says, yes, it's not very bad and it's not very good. And they both say that neither one is surprised at any bad thing that ever happens. That there's great promise in humanity, but at its core, humanity is wretched. And it's very easy to think that your wretchedness is better than the other guy. And because someone doesn't agree with you, they're the bad guy. It's very easy to put someone in buckets. And understanding truth and understanding what it means to seek the truth and speak the truth. And even if you're not a truth speaker, if you just understand that it is a search for truth, it helps keep you out of that trap, that box. And it's really kind of prison. I think that's what they were saying. It's kind of a prison that if you think only in terms of that there's good and evil must be confronted. You're evil, I'm not, I must confront you. It's kind of a trap, and it's a very dangerous place to be.
So, oh yeah.
And I was struck by that section as well, the Prentis, and it goes on as you'll recall that they also, so humanity is both wretched but also wonderful.
Yes.
And there's this interplay between sometimes we're wonderful, these extraordinary heights, as well as these extraordinary depths.
Yeah.
And they go on to talk about in another section, essentially identity politics. And I think they view that as one of the causes of these disrespectful, these generalizing, like we're the bad guys, we're the good guys. And in fact, they even coined a term I hadn't heard before, that there's this group of people who divide the world into categories they call idolatarians.
Yes.
Which I thought was kind of clever. But I think that's another insight that I came away with, that this tension, and frankly, you see it in the philosophers talk about the same things. The great religious figures talk about this two dimensions of humanity, and which is the dominant one. And I think when we're really honest, myself included, we all have the capacity to do that which we know we ought not to do, which St. Paul says. But equally, we know there's extraordinary moral courage in things that people do that change the world or change that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So speaking of clever, at the risk of opening a can of worms,
Go for it.
there's a chapter in the book which is confronting truth in history. And I loved Cornell's use of basically coining American culture to be jazz-like, and that he writes that the beauty of American history was to have an Adams and a Jefferson and a Douglas and a Tubman and immigrants from so many cultures. Here you go. Is the beauty of American history at risk?
Well, yeah, because he also talks about the immigrants, right? And how essentially he's saying diversity matters. And although today that's a loaded phrase, they both are saying it's very important. And I think they're right. I mean, what gets in the way of beauty and truth and goodness? It's idolatry, it's closed-mindedness, it's power seeking, a variety of things. And they each talk about that, and this in their own way, they're saying we shouldn't demonize the other, but their approaches are very different, because Robbie is very logical, thought, rational, sort of, if you will, an engineering kind of mindset. Show me the evidence. He does not like when his students say, "I feel this." That he wants to say, "How did you? You need to reason. You need to think your way to your position." And Cornell's not against that. But he says, wow, like jazz, experiences, creativity, they're also a part of finding truth and coming to an opinion. So I like the fact that they're so different, yet they see the beauty, if you will, in that. And I think that kind of comes to this point that how can we rediscover a world that allows for both of those approaches to seeing truth, beauty, and goodness. And I think both of them would say it's because we don't all look alike and think alike and act alike. That's where jazz happens. Cornell would say that's where something new is created. That's good.
Yeah, Prentice.
You can't play jazz unless you know the classics. If you don't know your scales, you don't know harmony and Bach and Beethoven, you really cannot play jazz with any kind of confidence. And it works because everyone knows the classics. Everyone knows the basics. They know the structure and the form, and then they can innovate on top of that. And then in the end, they come back to. And so I think I understood what he was saying, is that America is jazz because there's different musicians playing, right? But we all have to know the classics. We have to know these great truths. Otherwise, at the beginning of the book, Cornell was lamenting, that, today it seems everything is an illusion. Truth is an illusion. And you can't do that with jazz. You really have to know your stuff, be able to play. I have jazz musicians in my family. You know that. You do too, don't you?
No.
Oh, yeah.
I just played with some seriously great jazz musicians, which made me realize that I was a good player, but not a musician. I learned pretty early on by playing jazz with someone who became a world-renowned jazz musician that I was not going to go to Oberlin.
What was your instrument?
Trombone. So I came to Princeton to be in the band.
Please come back.
Yeah. So, how about the arc of history? Do you think in our society it bends towards justice?
So, first, maybe just recap what the two of them said. As I understood it, Robbie said, "Well, no, like history doesn't have a direction; it doesn't have an arc." So that's about as far as he went. Whereas Cornell, I thought a great move. He said, "Well, there's mini arcs, and they could be towards the good or towards the evil, back to this wonderful and wretched." And I got to thinking about it, because King, of course, used it, for those who don't remember, used that phrase a lot in almost in many of his sermons and speeches, that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice over time. And there's a lot of theological thoughts from different traditions. So you take some of the Eastern traditions, and they say, well, no, there's sort of this repetitive cycle that we go through, repeat our life and go through different cycles. And whereas the Jewish, to some extent, and the Christian tradition, we say, well, no, there's a beginning, a middle, and the end. And the Christian view would be the beginning was creation, the middle is Jesus, and the end is sort of the second coming. So there's lots of ways to think about this arc. Some of the German theologians had something called Heilsgeschichte, sort of salvation history. So is humanity going towards some end, some ultimate salvation? And so that's like a mini reflection on this huge question of where I stand in it. I kind of like Cornell's way of thinking about it. That I think over time there is a narrative towards the good, but there's a lot of obstacles and a lot of backward steps. But is the world a better place now with more justice than during medieval times? I would argue yes. So maybe that says there is empirically data evidence that there's less poverty and other things, but there's still horrible things.
So I hope everyone who's watching this Precept can understand how lucky I got to be able to have David and Prentice join this. It's like I'm just really very, very pleased to have you guys here. Prentice, your take on this?
I can't add anything to what David said. You hit it spot on.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the biggie. And this is something that Prentice raised in his notes, and it says regarding the American Empire. And I'd like to break this down into two parts. And the first is a question. Is America actually an empire? Has it been? Prentice and I actually disagree on that. And then this follow-up question to that is our empire, is this empire in decline?
So, well, since you raised it, do you want to go there first, Brad?
Yes, so Bill and I disagree on the fundamentals. Phil says, well, an empire, you think of England, they had a flag in every country, they had all these colonies, and the Roman Empire stretched all around the Mediterranean. They had land, they had claims on land. And I understand that, but my response was, those are examples of empires, but I think the American empire is based on other things. It's based two things. One is it's based on finance. America can lock the finances of any country on earth. They can impose sanctions that cripple the economies. Look what they've done in Iran, Russia,
Cuba.
The military, the US military is larger than all the other countries combined. I think the count was there's like 7,000 military bases all over the country. We just invaded Venezuela. There's threats to invade Iran. And people take these seriously because America has the might, right? And it's one of the things they talked about in the book was, is it about might makes right? So I think in that sense, we may not have colonies and formal territories that are vast, but I think America, for all intents and purposes, has the ability to control the destiny of our nations, and it has an empire.
Yeah, I think I'm aligned with your way of approaching it, not just that. So the basic definition of an empire, could debate that even, but it is there's some sort of central power that has control. Historically, we thought of geographic, like over territories, to your point, but it could be control over other levers of powers. That could be natural resources, it could be military might and financial might. So I would say that, yeah, we are an empire. So where are we in the classic rise and fall of empires? Because there's typically four phases. There's an ascension phase, there's a zenith, there's a sort of an overstretch where you stretch yourself too far, and then finally this collapse or decline and collapse. And that can come often from internal or external forces. So sometimes it's an own goal that through corruption, through dishonesty, through having an unjust system, and finally people get fed up with it. Or it could be external. So a new technology is developed, which upends everything, or there's a new military power. So I would say kind of using that framework that America is and has been an empire for a while. Whether we're past our zenith, I think that's debatable. But certainly I think there are threats, internal and external, to the power, the authority that, the reputation that our country has globally. And it's both inside and outside threats.
So further thoughts on whether we can actually pinpoint a decline?
I don't know, it's kind of like being an economist. Tell me what's. I don't, I can't answer. I'm not, I haven't thought about it enough, but I do have concerns. And, I mean, one small thing, and I look at, I've been teaching at Princeton for 17 years now. And when I started, I think the students in general had more of a sense that there are some things that are always right and wrong. There was a greater recognition that rules are important. And the young folks are just as smart as ever and big hearts. But I sense there's more ethical relativism now. There's a moving away from absolute truths, a suspicion of institutions that wasn't there before. And we need, those I think are fundamental to an entity staying healthy and whole. So if as a nation we're moving away from certain, dare I say, absolutes or boundary lines, then pretty soon anything goes. And we kind of see that now. I sort of tease my students. I say, you have higher odds of going into jail for white collar crime than someone that went to a local community college. Looking like, well, what? It's because you're so doggone smart, you can rationalize anything. In fact, a mutual friend of ours, Don Seitz, class of 79, is down here, went to jail because he got caught up in the Rick Singer Varsity Blues admissions scandal. And he's as smart as anyone in this room, Dartmouth grad even so, right? And so that concerns me a bit. And I think that's part of this internal decay or threat.
In decline?
I'm optimistic. I think our best days are still to come. You know, I as a hobby, you know, I kind of read a lot of books about the Roman Empire. You know, I read Gibbon and all that stuff. And so some people say, you know, the Roman Empire was at its greatest when Augustus ruled because it was the biggest. But then other people say it was the greatest when Marcus Aurelius was the emperor, you know, which was many, like a couple hundred years later. And I think I tell you what, I think our best days are to come, but I think the current generation of leaders are kind of stale. I think it's time for us to get a better leader.
That's pretty kind.
I think voting and participating in government, starting with local government, is more important now than it's been in a long time.
Yes, saying that we're in decline, I didn't mean to say, I think, I tend to be a half full kind of glass. So I think our best days still could be ahead. And like any institution, you can have down cycles. And so the question is, can we recognize those and find the tools to then equip ourselves to come out of that? I mean, Donna, you and I used to work for a company, IBM, that everyone thought was going to go out of business at one point because Microsoft and Google and everyone are eating their lunch. And companies now that are out of business, like DEC and others, are out of business. So you can adjust and pivot and come back. But I'm with you, Prentice, that I'm still very hopeful, but we need to be honest about some of these things.
Yeah.
That's well said. So we are getting close to the close of our speaking part. And I thought that we would end ours the way Cornel and Robert ended their class, the freshman seminar. And they posed to their class that you could choose an option A or an option B. Which do you choose as the truth? And I will mention that I actually read option A and option B to my wife, Judy, a couple days ago. And she chose the correct option without any prompting. So I'm going to pose option A or option B to you two, and let's see which you choose. And I have to read this kind of slowly because it's a little complicated. Option A: I will give you a fallacious argument for a true proposition, but my argument, although fallacious, you will find convincing, and therefore you believe the proposition which you previously had not believed. That's option A. Option B, I will give you a sound argument, a valid argument for the same proposition, but my argument, although valid and sound, will not be fully persuasive to you, as a result of which you will not embrace the proposition. And in the class, they had hands go up, option A, option B. And I think that there were 18 in the class, and 9 chose A and 9 chose B.
Well, to have some fun, Prentice, why don't you pick one and I'll do the other? I'll be the devil's advocate to whatever you pick.
Oh, well, okay, well, just to make it interesting. See, you know, do I want to put you on the spot or not?
Something tells me
Do I want
yes.
to put the professor on the spot?
Uh-oh. Hang on.
Professor on the spot. Okay, so I will pick option A.
Okay.
Because
So that's the one where it's a false argument.
give me the false argument because I want to feel good about it.
Oh, you want me to give you a false argument?
Yeah, give me the false, but if it's actually true, if the proposition is true, then whether it's false or not, I'm still following the truth. So
I'm trying to remember, in the book, did they actually give a case of what the dilemma might have been?
No,
They
it
did. Yeah.
it was sort of vague in the language.
Yeah.
But you could tell that these students were really paying attention.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, they obviously had strong views of which was the correct option. And Prentice is choosing option A. He wants the false argument. Makes him feel good.
Why does it make you feel good? If you came onto a truth that was built on a false grounds, if you later found out the false reason was false, would it undermine your belief in the truth?
well, I don't know it's fallacious. All I know is that it's a true proposition. Well, I'm assuming it's a true proposition.
But if you go back and read Gibbons or something later and find out that they were wrong, would that disappoint you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I've been given, you know, fallacious arguments all the time since I was a kid, you know. I mean, I can get very specific, right? I was told that Black people are not as smart as white people. Look at Mrs. Jones's 4th grade class. All the Black kids are in Mrs. Jones's class. But you're in Mrs. Smith's class because you're different. You're not like, that's what I was told. And it was a fallacious argument. But these kids were in the class, you can see it.
But that was a fallacious argument for not an underlying truth, because of course that's a false argument. So it's still terribly problematic. Don't get me wrong.
They weren't getting the grades. They weren't as good academically. They weren't performing academically. That's true. And they were my best friends. They were I said run with them and have fun, but they weren't in any of my classes. So that was a fallacious argument.
Absolutely.
And then I later learned, well, there's other reasons why that was true.
Yeah.
Right? They lived in a different neighborhood. For one,
Different resources,
made a huge amount.
different variables. Yeah. You know, another one, just sort of thinking on the spot that say go into the religion space. Let's say that you're told that if you behave a certain way, that you're going to rot and go to hell. And then you find out later, well, maybe that's not true. And how do you respond to that? So it's a provocative question, isn't it? There's another analog I thought of in the New Testament, that Jesus tells this parable that the master tells his employee to go do something, and the one employee says, sure, of course, boss, and goes off but doesn't do it. And the other employee thinks this is ridiculous and doesn't want to do it, but in the end goes and does it. And Jesus asks, which was the better employee? It's kind of this thing.
That's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember who he chose? It's a guy who ultimately did it.
Yeah.
not the one who went along. The second one.
So what's your argument, Professor?
Oh, gosh, I'm going with Jesus.
Gonna go with Jesus. Like, well, that's a winning argument.
Or, you know, the people used to wear bracelets which is not this saying, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I want to ask, like, what would Cornel do and what would Robbie do? I think that's a pretty good starting place also. Because it's just so refreshing to hear people, particularly with their different approaches to thinking and feeling, to learn from each other, to respect each other. Yeah, it's powerful.
So this is probably a good time to kind of come to conclusion. And I certainly want to thank David and Prentice for joining me. Want to thank Bob Duranek for having me lead these precepts and read these pretty amazing books. It's been a really great experience for me to sort of force myself be back in the classroom, because well, you know, we take these things seriously, right? But I guess I would sort of open to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for any of us, either out in Zoom land or here in the room?
I have a quick question, Phil. What was the correct answer? You said that you can't get a correct answer.
Well, you should ask Judy because she chose the correct answer.
Get the feet. That's what I thought.
But I have two quick statements.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, so my pastor has a saying that Phil and Prentice have both heard my pastor: dressed up live and outstrip the truth any day. So
I'm sorry, say that again.
a dressed up lie
Right.
can outstrip the truth any day. So, which is the issue at hand. And secondly, about empire, you say IBM, another IBM here.
Right.
So when you talk about empires, how do you know when an empire is passed? When you look at IBM, yeah, it thought you could command the world, and yet all its competitors are gone. But there was a time when, as we used to say, nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM.
I remember that.
But now nobody chooses IBM when it comes to technology. So it's still around, but it doesn't have the influence. So where is it? It hasn't fallen, but it's not the king of the hill. So is that an imperfect analogy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose IBM is still certainly powerful, but certainly they're not the king of the hill anymore. And we could take, say, the UK is still powerful, but certainly not the king of the hill anymore of the world. So I guess there's maybe an ultimate decline where you crumble and you're defeated, which certainly IBM isn't, and certainly the US isn't, or for that matter, certainly the UK isn't. But I suppose there's gradations of being no longer the top empire or the top power source. Yeah, attention.
How will we know? We'll know when, in my opinion, when oil is no longer traded in dollars.
Yeah.
Whatever currency, well, then that's how we'll know.
That's a good netting
So-
out. Yeah. I hope that's not in our lifetime.
So our 52 class president has a question from Zoom land.
It seems to me that the assembly has been talking about truth matters, and on the wall behind you is a picture of Albert Einstein. So truth can become very relative. But there's also a practical aspect of truth that you can't be oblivious to. For example, the Catholic Church at one point argued vociferously that the earth, that the sun revolved around the earth. And that was pretty well accepted to be false. And I think we would agree with that, generally speaking. But in the book Truth Matters, there is quite a discussion about abortion. And I have noticed in my own case that my ideas on abortion have changed as I have gotten older. So where is the truth, and what is the practical way to deal with the truth as you see it? So as we go forward, and I hope Phil, that we will do more preceptorials and that we will have people of different ages, including undergraduates, involved. I think it is helpful to consider these things because they affect to matters of state and they also affect matters of what you do in your daily life. So my question is, should we continue with what we're doing now?
I'm game. Why not? Sure, it's fun. It's challenging.
Yeah, great opportunity to involve the class of 2029.
I think that's a great idea. So if there are no further questions, I think oh wait, there may be.
Some coming in. Could we also get a glance at everyone who's out there in Zoom in for a moment? Just change the view, Margaret. This kind of interesting. I see we got about 19 people out there. There you go.
Yeah, and I will actually just conclude that this precept has been recorded and we will upload it onto the class of 1979 YouTube channel. So everyone can either see it again or recommend it to friends. And I want to also thank Marguerite for making this all happen with beautiful technology in this beautiful room.
Here.
And I thank the audience for listening.
Great job.
Yeah.